There are experiences in life that don't just hurt, they break something open. Grief is one of them. Not the kind of sadness that you recover from quickly at all, but the kind that changes the way you see the world, you see God, and you see yourself. If you've been through real grief like I did, you already know it strips you down, it takes away certainty, and it takes away the version of faith that you depended on when things were going well. I want to say something clearly now before going any further. Grief is not beautiful. It's not poetic. It's not something I would ever romanticize on. But one thing I can say is this. It humbles you deeply. It exposes how little control you actually have over your life. And for many people, it shatters not just their life, but their idea of God. There's a kind of faith that functions as long as life feels stable, as long as prayers are answered quickly, as long as loss remains distant enough. But grief exposes the limits of those faiths. I lost my dad about 4 years ago, and I want to be honest how I handled that. I didn't fall apart the way people expected me to. I didn't process it in a healthy or spiritual way. I just went numb completely. And for a long time, I functioned, but I wasn't truly present. That numbness wasn't strength. It was my nervous system protecting me from pain. When loss is overwhelming, the body doesn't always go into full panic. Sometimes it just shuts down quietly. I stayed functional, but I was disconnected from what I was carrying inside of me. When real loss enters, you are confronted with a choice. You either harden or you surrender. You either numb yourself or you slowly learn how to stay present little by little. And for a long time, grief didn't make me feel spiritual at all. It didn't make me feel close to God, but it did make me feel small inside. And in that smallness, something inside of me shifted. I stopped performing faith and I started needing God. Not for answers, not for outcomes, but for presence. And this is where faith actually starts to change. You stop asking, why did this happen, to who am I becoming right now? Grief doesn't give you meaning right away. It gives you responsibility. Responsibility for how you carry that pain, responsibility for how you treat other people around you, responsibility for whether suffering hardens you or softens you. What I didn't understand at the time was that my faith and my body were not in the same place at all. I believed in God, I trusted Him, but my body was completely shut. The body responds first, not in a reflective way, but in a very defensive manner. That is why grief often stays long after life appears to move on externally. What happened was over, but my bodily response wasn't. This is where many people get stuck completely. They try to work through grief by understanding it mentally, by believing the right things about it spiritually, but meaning doesn't land while the body is still on guard. Finding God gave me orientation in my life. It gave me something solid to stand on, but at the same time, it didn't undo what my body had learned in the state of shock. So the work had to happen in me. Feelings don't destroy you, but numbing your feelings really destroys you. That panic or anxiety you keep swallowing down or distracting yourself from, that's your body asking for space to breathe. Those sensations you avoid feeling deeply, that is where the emotion actually lives inside of you. Staying with what you feel in your body without fixing it, without escaping it, is how you come back to yourself. That's how your nervous system begins to finally settle. I began working with the breath not as a spiritual experience, not as an emotional release, but just as a way of meeting my body where it actually was. And I want to be clear about this. Trusting God didn't mean doing nothing and expecting everything to be fixed for me. I took responsibility for how my body was responding to grief. I actively learned how to regulate my nervous system, and through that work, I was able to stay present enough to connect with God more honestly. Nothing resolved all at once. There was no shift, no moment of relief, but what changed was softer. I just stayed present a little longer. I shut down a little less, and over time, honestly, that was enough. Grief didn't disappear fully, it just stopped taking over my life. And this part matters. Trusting God mattered deeply, but trust didn't mean waiting for everything to be fixed for me. It meant staying responsible for how I showed up and letting God meet me there in the middle. There is a temptation inside grief sometimes to make it your full identity, to become the wounded one, to become the broken one, to become the one that life was unfair to. But grief doesn't need to be claimed loudly in order to have real weight. It doesn't ask anything of you directly, it just sits there. And over time, you notice what it does to your reactions and your triggers. Like, for example, anger becomes heavier than usual. Certain responses start to feel out of proportion in life. Not because you're wiser, but because grief changes your sense of scale. What once felt urgent no longer feels urgent. What once felt worth reacting to doesn't anymore. Loss recalibrates what the body is willing to spend energy on. And over time, grief shapes how you move through the world every day, how open you stay, how much energy you spend, and what you're willing to carry forward within you. You either live around the pain or spend your energy fighting it daily. God doesn't explain this, but there is time. Time to adjust to what has changed. Time to move forward more carefully than before with a clearer sense of how fragile life actually is. Grief isn't something you come to appreciate over time. It just changes how carefully you live day by day and how little you take life for granted.